Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving into one of the most profound and honestly most misunderstood paradoxes in biblical literature. We're looking at the phrase, be angry and sin not. And I've got to tell you, digging into this text offers a total paradigm shift about human emotion and how we're supposed to handle our deepest frustrations. So let's just jump right in. So, first things first. Is it a sin to be angry? It's incredibly common for folks, especially a lot of well-meaning Christians, to just assume the answer is a flat yes. Like all anger is inherently sinful, it's all bad, and if somebody cuts you off in traffic, you just have to paste on a smile and repress it entirely. But when we look at the source material, the biblical text paints a completely different and frankly, way more practical picture. Okay, let's dive into this paradox. It comes straight from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 in the King James Version, and it says, "Be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath." Now, what we're looking at here is pretty revolutionary. Notice that anger itself isn't presented as the sin, right? The command isn't giving you a free pass to indulge your rage, but it's also not demanding that you turn into some kind of emotionless robot. It's actually a super practical call to govern your anger before it governs you. It's all about what your anger eventually becomes. You see, the Apostle Paul places this command inside a much bigger picture of character development. He lays out a very intentional progression here. Step 1 is just the raw emotion itself, anger. Step 2 is what it can morph into if you don't check it, which is sin. Step 3 is when that sin settles down and unpacks its bags, lingering resentment. And step 4, that's the ultimate danger. It becomes an actual opportunity for Satan. So this command is really a framework to cut off that downward spiral right at step 1. Let's put on our detective hats for a second and look at the original Greek. The word used for be angry is orgizeste, and scholars actually interpret this as an imperative command or an allowance that basically means if you become angry. The general consensus here is that anger will happen. It's an inevitable human response. The issue is never really about whether or not anger arises. The real issue is what happens the very next second. And the crazy thing is, Paul didn't just pull this concept out of thin air. He's actually quoting from the Old Testament, specifically Psalm 4, which was written by David. If we trace it all the way back to the original Hebrew, the root word used there is ragaz. Now, ragaz literally means to shake, to quake, to be disturbed or agitated. It's talking about a massive emotional stirring. You know that visceral, stomach-dropping feeling you get when you witness a genuine wrong? That's it. David is acknowledging that, hey, you are going to be deeply disturbed by things in this life. It's not just about rage, it's about being fundamentally shaken. So what exactly is the biblical prescription for this massive emotional disturbance? Well, look at what David advises. It is never revenge. It is never retaliation. The prescription is reflection, prayer, and stillness before God. David says to commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still. It's essentially an active pause, taking a crucial moment to let God examine your heart before you go and react. Now, to really grasp why anger isn't inherently evil, we need to look at the divine pattern. Our sources point out that God himself actually becomes angry. Psalm 7 tells us God is angry with the wicked every single day. In Exodus and Numbers, we see his anger burning against rebellion. But, and this is a huge but, here is the crucial distinction. God's anger is always measured, it's holy, and it is entirely purposeful. It is never petty, it's never an impulsive outburst, and it's certainly never selfish. Now, what's really interesting is how this same truth is brilliantly illustrated in the New Testament. Look at Mark 3:5. It notes that Jesus looked around with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts. Notice the remarkable coexistence of two very powerful emotions happening at the exact same time: anger and grief. Jesus is angry, sure, but not because someone wounded his pride. His anger is completely rooted in compassion and love for the people who are being harmed by hypocrisy. So how in the world do we tell the difference in our own lives? Well, we have to separate holy anger from sinful anger. Holy anger reflects God's character, right? It hates evil, it steps in to protect the vulnerable, and its ultimate goal is restoration. On the flip side, like the book of James describes, sinful human anger seeks revenge. It wants humiliation, domination, and self-justification. Sinful anger is all about me. It's completely disconnected from true justice. And this builds right into one of Jesus's absolute greatest concerns, the massive, canyon-sized difference between anger and contempt. Anger says, this action is wrong. Contempt, however, says, you are fundamentally worthless.
Yes, God gets angry at sin, absolutely, but he never ever despises those made in his image. He rebukes people while still loving them. Contempt literally strips away a person's humanity, which is exactly why Jesus condemns it so harshly.
Which brings us right back to Paul's warning, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. Why put a time limit on it? Well, the Greek word for anger actually shifts in the second half of that sentence to parorgismos, and this specific word means provoked anger, exasperation, lingering irritation, or embittered resentment. Paul is fiercely warning us against taking healthy anger and nursing it into a toxic, festering resentment.
Because if you do let it fester, you hit step 4 of that progression you looked at earlier. You give place to the devil. The Greek word for place there is topos, which means a room, a territory, or a foothold. Unresolved anger is basically incredibly fertile soil. As our source material points out, Satan rarely starts out by tempting someone with outright hatred. No, he starts with a whispered, "You know, you've been wronged," and he uses that perfectly justified anger to wedge the door wide open.
And once that door is open, man, it is a deadly devolution. Jesus teaches this directly in the Sermon on the Mount, and we can even see it all the way back in the ancient story of Cain. Murder doesn't start with a weapon. It starts in the heart. It devolves from anger, down into contempt, then into hatred, and finally, it erupts into violence. Look at Genesis. It never says Cain just exploded suddenly out of nowhere. No, he cherished his anger, he held on to it, and eventually it consumed him. So how do we stop this devolution before it starts? We adopt God's pattern. All throughout Scripture, God is described as being slow to anger. Notice his anger isn't absent, it's just incredibly patient, delayed, and intentional. It turns out, the biblical model isn't just count to 10 in your head. As the book of James instructs, we actually need to be swift to hear and slow to wrath. Taking the time to genuinely listen slows down the anger, whereas reacting quickly only throws gas on the fire.
Listen, if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, remember this one thing. The ultimate goal here is spiritual governance, not emotional numbness. The opposite of sinful anger isn't just being cold or totally devoid of feelings. The opposite is compassionate love. The biblical model actually invites us to feel deeply, to feel grief, to feel joy, and yes, even righteous anger. But the key is to have those emotions sanctified and governed through obedience to God, rather than letting the emotions govern us.
So, knowing all of this, how do we actually apply it when the heat of the moment strikes and our blood starts boiling? Our source material provides 4 absolutely vital questions for self-reflection. First up, why am I angry? Is it because God's truth or justice has been violated? Or is it simply because my own personal pride just took a hit? Think about it. If we are angrier over a personal inconvenience than we are over actual injustice, our anger is probably rooted entirely in ourselves. Okay, question number 2. What do I actually want to happen here? When you feel that fire rising up in your chest, you have to pause and evaluate your desired outcome. Are you genuinely seeking restoration, justice, and healing for the situation? Or are you secretly craving revenge and wanting to humiliate the person who crossed you? Question 3. Have I taken this to God before acting? Ask yourself, have you followed David's ancient counsel to go to your room, quiet your heart, and just be still? I mean, before you fire off that angry text message or before you speak those harsh words, have you actively allowed the Lord to sit down and examine your deepest motives? And finally, question 4. Am I holding on to this longer than I should? Is the sun literally going down on your wrath? We really have to remember this piercing truth. Unresolved anger reshapes your own character far, far more than it will ever change the person who wronged you. All it really does is build a permanent residence for bitterness right in your own heart. Ultimately, the perfect resolution to all of this is found at the cross. Think about it. Jesus faced false accusations, physical mockery, and crucifixion. He had literally every reason in the universe to unleash righteous anger. Yet his response was, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He didn't ignore or deny the injustice, but he entrusted that justice to the Father, completely refusing to let hatred have the final word. So the next time anger rises up within you, will it open a door for bitterness, or will it become a profound opportunity for grace? It's a question that completely changes how we read these ancient texts, and honestly, it's just the tip of the iceberg of what they have to say about human psychology. I highly encourage you to dive into the source material for yourself and see what else is hiding right there in plain sight.